It was November 17th, 2022, when Kenneth Eugene Smith was strapped to the execution gurney, his fate seemingly sealed. But unknown to Smith, at 8:02 p.m., the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals had issued a stay of execution. His lawyers immediately notified the Alabama Department of Corrections. Their response? A curt "noted." No one informed Smith of the stay. Instead, he lay there for hours, his body tightly secured, terrified and unaware of the legal intervention that was unfolding. Around 10 p.m., the U.S. Supreme Court vacated the 11th Circuit's stay, allowing the execution to proceed. The IV team entered the chamber and began their attempts. Needle after needle pierced Smith's arms and hands, each attempt failing to establish a viable line. As he cried out in pain, insisting that they were stabbing into his muscles, his protests were met with indifference, dismissed as the attempts dragged on. With growing desperation, Smith pleaded, "Call the fucking judge. My case number is 222-CV-497. Somebody in this fucking room, call the judge or call my lawyer." But his cries went unanswered. After more than an hour of failed attempts, things grew even worse. In what seemed like a final desperate effort, the gurney was tilted into an inverted crucifixion position, and Smith endured repeated stabbings under his collarbone with a large needle. The pain was blinding. It felt, Smith later recalled, as though he was being stabbed in the chest with a knife over and over again. A prison official grabbed his head, forcing it away from the area being punctured. By 11:20 p.m., whispers began to circulate that the execution might be called off. The protocol, it seemed, could not be completed before the death warrant expired at midnight. Yet, Smith remained in the dark, left to believe he was moments away from his end. The pain, the uncertainty, and the terror, each moment felt like torture. Finally, just minutes before midnight, state officials admitted defeat. They unstrapped Smith and told him simply, "It's over with." Shaking, drenched in sweat, he was taken back to his cell. It marked Alabama's third consecutive botched execution, an unthinkable streak that left the state's justice system under intense criticism. Now, 14 months later, his fate was sealed. January 25th, 2024. It was his turn again. This time, in a manner perhaps even more controversial than the first attempt. Kenneth Eugene Smith was about to become what UN human rights experts condemned as a human guinea pig. Determined to avoid a repeat of the November 2022 debacle, Alabama implemented sweeping changes to its execution protocol. Governor Kay Ivey launched a review of the state's methods, leading to significant reforms. These changes marked a grim milestone. Smith would become the first person executed using the highly controversial method of nitrogen hypoxia. With his final appeal just denied and no remaining legal options, Smith was now powerless to change his fate. The countdown began. The state would bring an end to a story that had spanned 36 years. Here we are, 36 years later, still talking about it, said Mike Sennett, the son of Kenneth Smith's victim. The man's been in prison right at twice as long as we knew our mom. The mother, 45-year-old pastor's wife Elizabeth Dorleen Sennett, was brutally murdered on March 18, 1988. Her death, the result of a callous murder-for-hire plot orchestrated by her husband, Reverend Charles Sennett Sr., who sought to claim her life insurance to escape mounting debts. Smith and his accomplice arrived at the Sennett home under the pretense of surveying the property for hunting, a ruse approved by Charles. Once inside, Smith attacked Elizabeth, beating her with a fireplace stool, a walking cane, and a galvanized pipe. He then got the job done with a 6-inch survival knife, inflicting a fatal series of stab wounds. To mislead investigators, the men staged the scene to look like a home invasion, stealing a video cassette recorder and stereo. But the truth unraveled quickly. 1 week after the murder, as investigators closed in, the husband, Charles Sennett, brought his own life to a tragic end to avoid facing justice, and Kenneth Smith was sentenced to death. When the clock struck 8 that morning, Smith awoke, immediately aware that this would be his final wake-up. In less than 12 hours, he would be strapped to the same gurney in the same chamber where his previous execution attempt had failed just over a year earlier. At 10 a.m., Kenneth Eugene Smith was served his final meal, a T-bone steak, cheese-covered hash browns, and scrambled eggs. Classic Waffle House fare. Unlike the previous day when he had refused breakfast and lunch, Smith accepted and consumed this meal. This would be the last solid food he would eat. Afterward, Alabama's protocol required him to fast, a precaution to prevent any issues such as throwing up or choking during the execution process, ensuring it proceeded without complications. These measures, while seemingly contradictory in the context of an execution, are intended to avoid unnecessary suffering. As the afternoon waned, Smith spent his final hours in quiet reflection with his loved ones. He received a visit from his wife and sons, who were later joined by his spiritual advisor, Reverend Jeff Hood. Hood described Smith as being at peace, though his fear was evident. While he had accepted his fate, he voiced concerns about nitrogen hypoxia, a method of execution never used in this form before, its effects shrouded in uncertainty. The choice of nitrogen hypoxia brought echoes of a brutal past. Gas as a means of execution has a dark and storied history in the United States. It began on a cold February morning in 1924 in Carson City, Nevada. In a makeshift gas chamber, officials tried and failed to properly vaporize cyanide acid. The result was a horrifying 6-minute ordeal as the condemned man, Guy John, convulsed and gasped, while horrified witnesses recoiled at the scent of almonds, the signature odor of cyanide. No autopsy was performed, fearing the gas in John's body might poison onlookers. Despite this grim start, officials deemed the execution a success. Over the decades, nearly 600 people would lose their lives in gas chambers across the U.S. With protocols varying wildly from state to state, prisoners were often stripped and shaved to minimize risks, and chambers were sealed with Vaseline to prevent leaks. But even with these precautions, executions frequently went wrong. Witnesses described agonizing deaths, prisoners convulsing violently, their faces reddening as they struggled for air. In one infamous case in Mississippi, a condemned man repeatedly slammed his head against a steel pole in desperation, his death stretching into agonizing minutes. These horrors culminated in international outcry, but the gas chamber's reign didn't end until 1999, when Arizona executed a man in front of more than 30 witnesses. The process took 18 grueling minutes, with the prisoner twitching and coughing as the gas rose. Now, nitrogen hypoxia represents a new chapter, one touted as humane, but untested and fraught with the weight of this brutal history. For Kenneth Smith, the uncertainty of the method only heightened his final hour's tension. As the minutes ticked away, he was left to face a legacy of torment and the unknown risk of his own ending. From 4 p.m. onward, Kenneth Smith was required to stop drinking any liquids. Like the restriction on solid food, this step was meant to prevent problems during the execution, highlighting the complex measures taken to ensure the procedure was carried out humanely, despite its ultimate intent. The time had come. Kenneth Eugene Smith lay strapped to the gurney, his face obscured by a mask that stretched from his forehead to beneath his chin. Smith smiled, nodded, and formed an I love you sign with his hand toward his family. Yet, even with his voice muffled beneath the mask, his final words resonated clearly. Tonight, Alabama causes humanity to take a step backwards. I'm leaving with love, peace, and light. Thank you for supporting me. Love all of you. Just minutes before 8 that night, the nitrogen gas began to flow, hissing softly as it filled the mask. At first, Smith appeared calm, but moments later, his breathing became visibly labored. Witnesses reported seeing Smith thrash violently, his body jerking against the restraints as though struggling for air. Jeff Hood, Smith's spiritual advisor, stood among the witnesses.
We saw spit. We saw all sorts of stuff from his mouth develop on the mask. We saw this mask tied to the gurney and him ripping his head forward over and over and over again.
Smith's movements slowed and then ceased altogether, indicating he had likely lost consciousness. His face, which had flushed deeply during the initial moments, grew still under the mask. The room fell silent as all visible signs of life stopped. His death appeared to occur at this time, though the witness curtain remained open for several more minutes. At 8:25 p.m., Kenneth Eugene Smith was officially pronounced dead. Smith's effort to hold his breath for several minutes likely intensified the physical responses observed during the execution, such as facial discoloration and bodily movements. These reactions, Commissioner John Hamm later stated, were involuntary and expected. But those present, including Hood, were unconvinced. It was very clear he was suffering. Is it justified to use a monster like Kenneth Smith as a guinea pig, or has a line been crossed? Share your thoughts below, and don't forget to like and subscribe.